The wind howled outside as Clara Miller sat behind the counter at Mello's Diner. It was another dreary winter morning in the small town of Brookside, the kind where the gray sky never quite lifted, and the streets seemed deserted until the day finally settled into a predictable rhythm. It was one of those mornings where everything felt heavy, as if the world had paused just to take a breath. And in that moment, Clara felt a sense of quiet that was both familiar and unsettling. She had been at Mello's Diner for 3 years, serving plates of eggs, toast, and coffee to the regulars who trudged in every day. The work was simple enough, but nothing about it made her feel like she was living. The routine had become a loop, a cycle of waking up early, putting on her apron, and settling in behind the counter, where she would pass the hours until closing time. Her life was small, and it felt that way more and more as the years passed. The people she served, the conversations she overheard, the jokes that circulated like they always did, none of it ever seemed to reach her. She lived alone, in a cramped apartment above the pharmacy a few blocks away, with nothing more than old photos of her late parents and an occasional postcard from an aunt who lived in Arizona. Her father had passed away when she was just 15, and her mother had followed 2 years later, leaving Clara to navigate the rest of her teenage years on her own. She had no siblings, no close friends, and no reason to expect that life would ever offer her something different than what it had always given her: routine and quiet. On this particular Tuesday in early October, when the chill of fall was starting to settle in, something changed. It wasn't dramatic at first. In fact, Clara wasn't sure why she noticed him. He was just another face in the steady flow of customers. But there was something about this boy that lingered with her. He couldn't have been older than 10, maybe 11, and he was different from the usual crowd of farmers and truckers who came in for coffee before heading back to their work. He didn't order pancakes or a stack of toast, nor did he chat with the others or make small talk while waiting for his food. Instead, he sat by the window in the farthest booth, his oversized backpack placed beside him, a book always open on the table. The first day he arrived, he didn't ask for anything but a glass of water. Clara brought it to him, her usual smile in place, even though she couldn't shake the feeling that something about the boy was off. He looked at her when she set the glass down, his eyes steady but guarded, and when she smiled at him, he gave a slight nod, so small it was barely noticeable, but it was a thank you of sorts. Clara didn't think much of it at the time, but she couldn't help but wonder about him. The second day, he came back at exactly the same time, 7:15 a.m., and ordered only the same water. She brought it to him without asking, and again, he thanked her with that barely perceptible nod. It wasn't much, but it felt like something, even if it was just a shared moment between the two of them. By the third day, Clara had noticed a pattern. He arrived precisely at 7:15 each morning, 15 minutes before the school bell rang 3 blocks away. He would sit at the same booth, never ordering more than a glass of water. Sometimes he would glance up from his book, but mostly he was absorbed in whatever he was reading. Clara kept her distance. She didn't want to make him uncomfortable by prying, but something about his solitude struck her in a way that made her pause. She wasn't used to seeing someone so young, so removed from the world around them, so quiet, so alone. By the end of the first week, Clara found herself waiting for him to walk in each morning. It became a sort of unspoken ritual. At first, it felt strange, this routine of hers that seemed to orbit around a boy who never spoke and never ate. It was as if his presence in the diner each morning had become her own small distraction, a piece of something bigger than her own life, even though she didn't understand why. There was an ache in the pit of her stomach, a curiosity that she couldn't ignore. Then, on the 15th day, it happened. Clara made a mistake. The kitchen had sent out an extra order: pancakes, eggs, bacon, and Clara, absent-mindedly, placed the plate in front of the boy. She wasn't sure why she did it, only that the thought of throwing the food away seemed wasteful. Maybe it was because he looked so thin, so fragile, that it felt wrong to let food go to waste when he was sitting right there. She apologized immediately, explaining that the cook had mixed up the orders and that she'd just leave it for him, but the boy hesitated. For a moment, his eyes flashed with suspicion, and Clara could almost see the struggle within him. It's okay, she reassured him. Better to eat it than throw it away, right? The boy didn't speak, but after a long moment, he picked up the fork and began to eat. Clara didn't stay to watch, but she couldn't help but glance at him from behind the counter, her eyes flicking back and forth between her work and his quiet eating. By the time she came back to collect the plate, the food was gone. The boy's eyes never left his book. It was as if the plate had never existed, as if he had eaten not because he was hungry, but because she had offered. That was the moment Clara knew there was more to this boy than just his quiet demeanor. The next morning, she brought him another extra plate. Pancakes again. No questions asked. Just pancakes. The boy took them without hesitation, as if he had been waiting for that moment. And from then on, every day, Clara made sure there was always something extra, something for him to eat. No questions, no demands. She just hoped it would be enough. By the time the second week rolled around, Clara had become accustomed to the boy's routine. Every morning at precisely 7:15 a.m., without fail, he would slide into his usual seat by the window. The book would open, and the world around him would disappear. He would barely acknowledge the hum of the diner, the clinking of dishes, or the buzz of conversation. His world was contained in the pages of that book, and Clara wondered sometimes what story was unfolding in his mind. She didn't ask. She never did. It was a silent agreement between the two of them, a connection that felt delicate and fragile, like the thread of a spider's web. She would bring him the same glass of water with the same paper straw, and each time he would give her that barely noticeable nod. It was a ritual. But it was a ritual she looked forward to now, one that had become a part of her day, as regular as the turning of the seasons. On the fourth day of the second week, Clara watched him take the water in one hand, his eyes scanning the words on the page in front of him. There was a certain stillness about him, as though the entire world had faded into the background. She noticed how small he seemed, how delicate his hands were as he held the glass. His fingers, long and slender, gripped the rim of the cup, as though he were afraid it might slip from his grasp. There was something about the way he sat that tugged at her heart. She wondered if he ever felt seen, if anyone had ever noticed him before. The thought lingered with her as she went about her duties, filling coffee cups, delivering plates of eggs and bacon, taking orders from regulars. She tried not to focus on him too much. She didn't want to invade his space. He didn't seem like the type of boy who wanted attention. But her mind kept wandering back to him, this quiet child who sat in her diner every morning and never asked for anything, yet seemed to need so much. The second week passed without much change. Clara continued to bring him extra plates of food when the kitchen made too much. Some days it was pancakes, other days it was scrambled eggs with toast or oatmeal with brown sugar. It was always something, and every time the boy ate it all, never leaving a crumb behind. Clara noticed how quickly he ate, sometimes almost ravenously, as though he feared the food might vanish before he could finish. But he never said a word. He never asked for more, never asked for anything beyond the glass of water that had become a constant in his life. He didn't ask for a refill, didn't ask for more food. He just ate in silence, and then when the clock struck 7:55 a.m., he would close his book, push the plate aside, and leave. Clara couldn't understand it. She couldn't understand why he never stayed longer, why he never tried to talk to anyone. He was always so careful about his interactions, as though he didn't want to be noticed, as though being invisible was somehow safer. It was a strange thing to witness, a boy who came every day but never really existed, except in the quiet corners of her mind. By the end of the second week, the diner regulars had noticed the boy, of course. They couldn't help but talk about him. There was Harold, the retired postal worker, who sat in his usual spot every morning and always had something to say. He was the first to ask Clara about the boy. "You've been serving that kid every morning, haven't you?" Harold asked one day, his voice low but curious. Clara nodded, keeping her tone neutral. "Yes, he comes in every morning. Just a glass of water." Harold shook his head, his wrinkled face furrowing with concern. "Never seen his parents. Don't know where he comes from, but he sure doesn't look like he has much." Clara didn't know what to say. She didn't know anything about the boy, not his name, not his story. She only knew that he was there every day at the same time in the same booth. and he was hungry, even if he never said it out loud. Kathy, the grill cook, cornered Clara in the back of the diner a few days later, her expression tight with concern. "You're feeding a stray," Kathy said matter-of-factly. "Not trying to be cruel, Clara, but this is how it goes. You give handouts, they never learn gratitude. They just disappear one day, like they always do." Clara didn't argue. She had heard it all before. She knew Kathy was right in some ways. There were always people like this, people who needed help, but only for a while, people who didn't stick around. But Clara couldn't bring herself to stop. Not yet. Not while the boy was still coming in every morning, sitting in his corner booth, never asking for anything but a glass of water. "I used to be that hungry too," Clara said quietly, her voice soft but resolute. It was the most personal thing she had ever shared with Kathy, and it was the truth. She didn't need to elaborate. Kathy didn't say anything after that, just turned back to her grill, but Clara felt the weight of those words settle in the space between them. The days passed, and the routine continued. Clara made sure his water glass was always full, made sure the pancakes were warm, and that the eggs were cooked just right. She tried not to think too much about him, tried not to wonder where he came from or why he was always alone. It wasn't her place to ask. But every day, as the boy sat in his corner, she allowed herself a quiet moment to wonder. Was he living nearby? Did he have family? Why was he always alone? And why did hunger seem like such a familiar companion to him? She didn't have answers, but she didn't need them. All she knew was that for 40 minutes each morning, the boy found a place where he could breathe a little easier. And for Clara, that was enough. As the third week came to a close, the routine between Clara and the boy had settled into something almost predictable. He arrived at 7:15 a.m. every day, and every day she brought him the same glass of water, the same quiet gesture of kindness. The cook would sometimes throw in an extra batch of pancakes or a handful of scrambled eggs, and Clara would make sure they went to the boy. He ate every bite, his movements quick and deliberate, and after exactly 40 minutes, he would stand up, thank her with a small, almost imperceptible nod, and leave without a word. It was becoming a part of the diner's rhythm. And yet, there were moments when Clara couldn't help but wonder if the boy was merely surviving or if there was something deeper to his silence. She had served so many people over the years, and most of them came and went, leaving only a small ripple behind. But this boy, he stayed, day after day, like a quiet, unspoken promise that the world hadn't completely forgotten how to care. One afternoon, as Clara wiped down the counter between the morning and afternoon rush, Harold, the retired postal worker, sat down at his usual spot and eyed her cautiously. He had been watching her and the boy closely for weeks, and now there was something in his voice that wasn't there before. A hint of concern. "Clara, you know that kid," Harold said, not bothering to lower his voice. "I've been coming in here for years, and I've never seen him with anyone, never heard him speak about his family or where he's from." Clara kept her face neutral, though inside, her stomach tightened. She didn't want to talk about the boy. She didn't want to give Harold any reason to pry further. But Harold wasn't one to let things slide. "Kids these days," he muttered, shaking his head. "They expect handouts everywhere. Never did that when I was young. When I was hungry, we went to work for our food." Clara forced a smile, though she could feel her patience slipping. Harold wasn't a bad man, but sometimes he spoke as though he had never known hunger himself, never understood what it was like to go to bed with an empty stomach and wonder where the next meal might come from. "I'm sure he has his reasons," Clara replied softly, hoping to shut down the conversation without confrontation. But Harold wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice lowering, as though he was about to impart some wisdom. "You keep feeding that kid like this, Clara, and he's never going to learn how to stand on his own. You're just enabling him." Clara didn't respond. She just gave him the briefest of nods and moved on to the next task, refilling the sugar packets. Harold grumbled under his breath but didn't push further. Clara tried to ignore the lingering weight of his words. She had heard it all before, but this time, it felt different. This time, it struck her in a place she hadn't expected, a small, almost unnoticeable crack in her resolve. Was she doing the right thing? Would the boy really disappear one day, just like the others, never learning how to fend for himself? But Clara couldn't stop. Every time she looked at the boy, sitting there reading his book, she saw something in him, a quiet desperation that she couldn't ignore. She had been that child once, hadn't she? Hungry and alone, trying to survive in a world that didn't seem to care. She had learned how to fend for herself, but she hadn't forgotten what it was like to feel invisible, to feel like nobody was watching, nobody cared. And she wasn't about to let him go hungry, not when she had the chance to offer him something that cost so little, just a meal, just a small bit of kindness. The days passed, and Clara continued to bring him food. Sometimes it was pancakes, other times eggs and toast. She made sure the portions were just enough, though she didn't know why she felt the need to give him more than he ever asked for. Perhaps it was because she remembered what it was like to feel that gnawing emptiness in her stomach, the quiet hunger that wasn't just physical, but emotional too. One day, after 3 weeks of serving him, Kathy caught her in the back again, this time with a look that was half concern, half something else. "You're still feeding that kid," Kathy said, her voice flat. "And he never says thank you, never asks for anything. What's the point, Clara?" Clara hesitated before answering, her hands busy at the sink, though her mind was elsewhere. "He doesn't ask for anything because he doesn't need to. He just needs someone to see him." Kathy scoffed. "Yeah, but what about you? You're giving him free food every day. You think he's just going to walk away one day and you'll never see him again?" Clara didn't answer. She didn't want to get into it with Kathy again. She had no answers. She didn't know why she kept giving. It wasn't just about the boy. It was about something deeper, something that Clara couldn't fully understand herself. She had never asked for anything from anyone. She had never expected anyone to offer her a hand. But when she looked at the boy, she saw something that she couldn't ignore. Something familiar. Something that made her want to keep feeding him, to keep providing him with what she hadn't been given. The boy never asked for more, but every time Clara looked at him, she saw something in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. A need, a hunger. Whether for food or for something else entirely, Clara didn't know. But she couldn't stop herself. She couldn't turn her back on him. Not yet. And so she continued. No questions asked, no explanations given. Just food, just kindness, one small act at a time. The days dragged on, and Clara found herself caught in a web of routine. But the absence of the boy one Thursday morning caught her completely off guard. The weather was colder than usual, a crisp chill hanging in the air as the wind rustled through the streets. But it wasn't just the weather that unsettled her. It was the empty booth in the far corner, the same booth he always occupied. She had grown accustomed to his presence, his silent ritual. The fact that he hadn't shown up by 7:20 a.m. made her heart skip a beat, but she told herself it was nothing. Maybe he was sick. Maybe something had come up. But even as she went about her morning, refilling coffee cups and serving eggs and toast, she couldn't shake the unease that settled deep in her stomach. The clock ticked away as the usual rhythm of the diner continued, but Clara's attention kept drifting back to the door. She glanced at it every few minutes, her mind repeating the same questions over and over. Where was he? Why hadn't he come today? By the time the rush had slowed, Clara found herself walking back to the booth where the boy usually sat. There, she found the plate of pancakes she'd prepared for him, just in case, still sitting untouched. She felt a pang in her chest, something that reminded her of the emptiness she used to feel when no one cared enough to notice. She wrapped the plate in a napkin and carried it to the back, too unsettled to do anything else with it. The following day came, and once again, the boy didn't show up. Clara's nerves were beginning to fray. She tried not to let it bother her, but the longer the boy stayed absent, the more the uncertainty gnawed at her. Was he okay? Had something happened to him? Was he simply done with her little act of kindness, done with the meals she provided him with no questions asked? By the third day of his absence, Clara had lost the little bit of peace she'd managed to hold on to. The unease had turned into something more profound, an aching sense of loss. She found herself staring at the empty booth again, her thoughts consumed by the boy. She wasn't sure why she cared so much, why she felt this pull to make sure he was all right. She had never even known his name. But the silence in the diner was deafening, and it wasn't just the quiet of an empty seat. It was the absence of someone who had, for a brief moment, reminded her that kindness still had a place in the world, even if it was only for a boy who never spoke and never stayed long enough to be noticed by anyone but her. When the week passed with no sign of him, Clara began to wonder if Kathy had been right. Had the boy simply disappeared, like so many others before him? Had he come for a brief moment, taken what he could, and moved on without a trace? The thought settled heavily in her chest, and a small, hollow ache grew. She didn't know what to do with it. Kathy's voice echoed in her mind as she went about her work on the seventh day. They always do. They just disappear one day. Clara had tried not to let it get to her, but as the diner slowly emptied and she wiped down the counter, she couldn't help but think of the boy, sitting alone in the booth, never asking for more, never making a sound. He had become a part of the daily rhythm, and without him, the diner felt emptier than it ever had before. Then, just as Clara began to prepare to close the diner, she heard a soft voice behind her. She turned around to see Mark, the manager, standing in the doorway to the back office, holding his phone in one hand. His face was serious, something she hadn't seen in a long time. "Clara, you might want to see this," he said quietly. She followed him to the small office, her mind still spinning with thoughts of the boy. Mark handed her the phone without a word. It was a notification from a local Facebook group. The caption read, "Rosie's Diner now serving imaginary charity cases." The post included a picture of the empty booth where the boy usually sat, with a mocking tone beneath it. Clara's heart sank. She knew the world was full of judgment, but seeing it laid out so openly like this made the sting of cruelty even sharper. She scrolled through the comments, each one worse than the last. Some called her foolish. Others claimed it was a publicity stunt. The words were harsh, laced with the kind of bitterness that seemed to seep through the digital screen. At that moment, a familiar feeling of helplessness washed over Clara. She had always been a quiet person, someone who didn't seek the spotlight. But this felt like a slap in the face. She hadn't done this for recognition. She hadn't done it for anyone but the boy. But now, in the eyes of those who didn't know the story, she had become the subject of mockery. She closed the phone, the weight of the words lingering in her mind. Mark watched her quietly, sensing the depth of her discomfort. "I didn't know this was going to happen, Clara," he said after a long silence. "But we'll figure something out. Just ignore it for now." But Clara couldn't ignore it. As she returned to the main area of the diner, her hands shook slightly, and she couldn't seem to shake the sense of injustice that lingered in the air. The boy had come, had eaten her food, and had left each day without causing any trouble. So why did this feel so wrong? Just before she closed the diner for the night, Clara looked at the booth one last time. Her thoughts were scattered, a mix of doubt and frustration clouding her mind. She didn't have the answers. She didn't know why she had cared so much, why she felt this pull to feed a child who would never speak his story. But she knew one thing. The boy's absence had left a hole she couldn't fill. And now it seemed like she was alone in this battle, left to face the cruel opinions of people who couldn't see what she saw. As the lights dimmed and the last customers trickled out, Clara made her way home, her heart heavy with the silence that had filled the diner. It had been 10 days since the boy had last shown up, and the emptiness in the diner felt unbearable. Clara went through the motions of her work each day, but something was missing, something that used to anchor her mornings. She would find herself glancing at the door, hoping to see him step inside. But each time the bell above it chimed, it was always someone else. She had hoped for the past week that he would return. But now, with each passing day, that hope was slipping away. Kathy had been right in a way. The boy had disappeared, just like that. The emptiness left behind was something Clara had never truly anticipated. She had spent so much time trying not to get attached, trying to guard herself from feeling much for someone she barely knew. But the truth was, she had become attached. To him. To the quiet, small routine they had shared every morning. And now, without him, the diner felt colder, the walls seemed more confining, and the air was thicker, somehow. It wasn't just the boy's absence that gnawed at Clara. It was the cruel words from the Facebook group, the ridicule that had followed her small act of kindness. She had always kept to herself, never asking for attention, never seeking anything more than to do her job and go home. But now, with the weight of the comments pressing on her shoulders, she began to question her own actions. Had she been wrong to help him? Had she done it for the right reasons? Or had she just been trying to fix something broken in herself? On the 10th day of his absence, Clara found herself once again staring at the empty booth, the spot where he had sat so many times, day after day. She couldn't let go of the feeling that he was still out there somewhere, that he needed her, needed someone to show him that he wasn't invisible, that someone cared. The weight of that thought pulled at her heart, made her want to do something, anything, to make sure he was okay. And then, just as the clock struck 9 a.m., something unexpected happened. The door to the diner swung open, and 4 sleek black SUVs rolled into the parking lot. The sound of engines humming echoed in the quiet morning air, breaking the stillness that had settled in the diner for the past week. Clara's hand froze on the coffee pot, her eyes drawn to the cars outside. She hadn't seen anything like it before. Not in this small town. The SUVs pulled up in front of the diner, and Clara's heart began to race. She wasn't sure what was happening, but there was something about the scene that felt significant. The men who emerged from the vehicles were dressed in dark suits, their movements precise, almost choreographed. They stood at attention beside each door, as though they were waiting for something or someone. And then from the lead SUV, a tall man stepped out, his posture commanding. His face was weathered, like someone who had seen more than their fair share of hardship, and his uniform shimmered with ribbons and medals. Clara's breath caught in her chest. There was something about this man, something that set him apart from the ordinary world that she knew. The men moved with a purpose, heading toward the diner's entrance. Mark, who had been working in the back office, stepped out nervously, straightening his tie as though to prepare himself for whatever was coming. Clara stood frozen, unable to take her eyes off the scene. The bell above the door chimed loudly as the men entered, their footsteps deliberate and steady. Clara's hands were suddenly cold, and she felt a chill run through her, though the room was warm. The man in the front, the one who seemed to be in charge, approached Clara. His eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. The others stood back, waiting in silence. "I'm looking for someone." The man's voice was low, yet firm. A woman named Clara Miller. Clara's heart skipped a beat, and she stepped forward, her voice shaky but steady. "I'm Clara." The man's face softened just slightly. He seemed to take in her nervousness, his gaze shifting from her to the surrounding diner before he spoke again. "I'm Colonel David Reeves, United States Army Special Forces Command," he said, pulling a crisp envelope from his breast pocket and holding it out to her. "I'm here because of a promise made to one of my men." Clara took the envelope with trembling hands, confused and unsure of what was happening. She looked at it, then back at the colonel, her mind racing. He didn't seem like the kind of man who came to a diner without a very serious reason. And yet, she couldn't make sense of why he was here. The colonel's expression softened further as he spoke. "This letter is from the commanding general of Special Forces Operations, but I also have a personal message, a message from someone who wanted to make sure you got it." He paused, his gaze shifting briefly to the men standing behind him before looking back at Clara. "A message from Adam's father." Clara's breath caught in her chest. Adam, the boy. Her heart began to pound in her chest as recognition dawned on her. She had never asked his name. She had never pushed him to reveal his story. But in that moment, everything fell into place. Adam was the boy who had come to her diner every morning, the one who had sat in silence with his book and quietly eaten the food she offered. The boy who had disappeared. "Adam?" Clara repeated softly, her voice barely a whisper. The colonel nodded. "Yes, Adam Thompson. His father was Master Sergeant James Thompson, one of the finest soldiers under my command." Clara's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words as they took shape. And then, as she read, a lump formed in her throat. Adam wasn't just any child. He wasn't just a stranger who needed food. He was the son of a soldier who had made a sacrifice that Clara had never imagined when she first started feeding him. The letter from Sergeant Thompson was brief but powerful. Clara's tears began to blur the ink as she read the words written by a father who had known he might never return. If anything happens to me, the letter said, please thank the woman named Clara Miller. She fed my son without question, without asking why. She preserved his dignity, his sense of worth. Please tell her she didn't just feed a hungry child. She gave him something far more important, something he will carry with him for the rest of his life. Clara lowered the letter, her chest tightening as the reality of it all sank in. The boy she had fed, the boy who had sat quietly in her diner, was the son of a man who had given his life for a cause he believed in. The colonel spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. Sergeant Thompson fell in Afghanistan 2 months ago, and Adam, he's with his grandparents now in Colorado. But for the last few months, he came here to this diner every day before school. He came for you, Clara. He came because you showed him kindness when no one else did. Clara blinked back her tears, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. She had never expected any of this. She had never thought that feeding a child would lead to this. An entire world she had never known, one that was filled with gratitude and sacrifice, all wrapped up in a single meal. Thank you, the colonel said, his voice low and respectful. On behalf of Adam, on behalf of his father, and on behalf of all of us in Special Forces, thank you. As Clara stood there, unable to speak, the rest of the diner seemed to hold its breath. The silence was thick, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke of respect, of recognition for something that had been hidden, something that had been there all along but had never been seen. The air in the diner felt thick, almost charged, as Clara stood holding the letter, the words from Sergeant Thompson still swimming in her mind. The colonel, Colonel David Reeves, stood a few feet away, waiting, while the men behind him remained at attention, their eyes trained on Clara. She could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of what was happening, pressing down on her chest. The colonel's voice broke through the silence. Sergeant Thompson wanted you to know that Adam is safe. He's with his grandparents in Colorado now, and he's doing well. But the way he spoke about you, Clara, it meant something. It meant a lot to him. He paused, his expression softening. It means a lot to all of us. Clara didn't know what to say. She had never expected anything like this. Never imagined that something as simple as a few extra pancakes, a glass of water, would lead her to stand in the center of a room filled with soldiers, each of them bowing their heads in respect. It felt surreal, as though she were watching it all from a distance, unable to fully grasp the reality of what had just been revealed. I didn't know, Clara finally whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know he was. Her throat tightened, and she struggled to find the words. I didn't know he had been through so much. The colonel nodded, his face solemn. Most of us didn't. Adam didn't talk about it. He didn't want anyone to know. But we found out when he started coming here, to this diner, every morning. He talked about you, Clara, about how you never asked him questions, about how you just fed him. He said that was the one thing that made him feel seen. Clara's heart ached as she heard those words. Seen. It was something she had never considered, but now it made sense. The boy had never asked for anything. He had never complained, never made a scene. He had just quietly accepted what she had given him, and it had been enough. But in return, she had given him something more than just food. She had given him dignity, a space where he didn't have to explain himself, where he didn't have to be afraid. Adam's father, Sergeant Thompson, he was one of the best men I've ever known, the colonel continued, his voice thick with emotion. He gave everything for his country, and he wanted to make sure his son was taken care of. He never thought he'd be sending a letter like this, but he made us promise that if anything happened to him, we would find you and thank you in person. Clara wiped her eyes, feeling the tears she hadn't realized had started to fall. The emotions were overwhelming. She had never expected any kind of recognition for what she had done. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had simply done it because she remembered what it was like to be hungry, to feel invisible, and to have someone see you when you were at your lowest. Thank you, Clara, the colonel said again, this time with a deeper sense of respect in his voice. What you did wasn't just feeding a child. You preserved the dignity of a soldier's son. You gave him something that's impossible to quantify. Clara shook her head, still struggling to process everything. I I just gave him food. I didn't do anything special. The colonel smiled, a small, almost sad smile. Sometimes, Clara, giving food is more than enough. You didn't just give him a meal. You gave him the feeling that he mattered, that someone cared. And that's something that many kids in his situation never get. You might not have realized it, but you saved him. You made a difference. The diner was silent now, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Clara felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at the men in front of her. They weren't just soldiers. They were people who understood sacrifice. They had fought for their country, and now they were standing here, offering their thanks to her, someone who had never asked for anything in return. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his hand extended in a formal salute. On behalf of the United States Army Special Forces, and most importantly, on behalf of Adam, we thank you, he said, his voice steady and full of respect. The others followed suit, offering the same salute, a gesture of honor that Clara had never expected. Her eyes widened as she realized what was happening. The quiet, humble waitress she had always seen herself as was now the center of an unexpected moment of respect, a moment that she had never imagined in her wildest dreams. The colonel turned to his men. "Let's give her a moment," he said. And with that, the group stepped back, giving Clara space to process everything. She stood there, frozen in place, still holding the letter from Sergeant Thompson, the words blurring before her eyes. After a long pause, Clara finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do it for the thanks. I didn't do it for recognition. I just didn't want him to go hungry. I didn't want him to feel alone." The colonel nodded, his eyes softening. "You did more than you know." As the men left the diner, one by one, Clara stood there, staring at the door, her mind reeling with the weight of what had just happened. The diner was quieter than usual, the air still thick with the lingering sense of something important having taken place. Clara felt an unfamiliar weight in her chest, a heaviness that came from the realization that sometimes even the smallest acts of kindness could change the course of someone's life. And as she watched the last of the soldiers leave, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She had never sought out any recognition for what she had done, but in that moment, she understood. The kindness she had given to one person had somehow rippled outward, reaching far beyond the walls of the diner. She had made a difference, and that, she realized, was more than enough. Clara took a deep breath and glanced at the empty booth where Adam had once sat. The silence in the diner felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of something she couldn't quite name. But it was there, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen. The following weeks after the colonel's visit were filled with an unexpected stillness, but a stillness that felt somehow more hopeful than it had before. Clara kept to her routine, serving the regulars with her usual quiet smile. But now there was something different about the way she moved through the diner. She had always done her job without much thought, simply going through the motions. But now, every plate of food she served felt like an opportunity, a small chance to make someone else's day just a little better. As word of the Special Forces visit spread through Brookside, things at Mello's Diner started to change. It was subtle at first, just a few more smiles, a few more conversations, but then something unexpected happened. The diner became a place of reverence. People who had never given Clara a second glance started to acknowledge her, to offer words of thanks or appreciation. Regular customers who had once mocked her for feeding strays now came in with a different attitude. Some left larger tips than they had before. Others simply offered words of encouragement, telling her how much they appreciated her kindness. Mark, the manager, who had once hesitated when it came to Clara's generosity, began to change as well. He started placing small handwritten notes on the counter, notes that read things like, "Thank you for reminding me what matters," or "I never realized how much one simple act of kindness can do." He had even placed a small American flag next to the booth where Adam had once sat, a quiet tribute to both the boy and the man who had been lost in service. The transformation was not just in the diner, it spread throughout the town. One evening, Clara was walking home when she noticed a group of people gathered outside the community center. They were laughing, talking, and something about the scene struck her. There was a sense of connection among them, a sense of belonging. It wasn't anything grand. No loud speeches, no grand gestures. It was just people coming together, sharing a space, their lives intertwined in small, unspoken ways. Clara passed by, nodding a polite hello, but she couldn't help but feel that somehow the world around her was changing. It wasn't as if everything was suddenly perfect or that all the world's problems had been solved. But there was a shift, a gentle, quiet shift, and it felt as if it had started with one small, unnoticed gesture, a plate of pancakes for a hungry boy. A month later, as Clara cleaned the diner one late evening, she noticed something new on the bulletin board beside the counter. It was a small plaque with the words, "Reserved for those who serve and the families who wait." Below it was a picture of Adam, smiling, his face full of a quiet strength, just like the boy who had come to her every morning. Clara had no idea who had placed it there, but when she looked at it, she knew it didn't matter. The plaque wasn't just for Adam. It was for everyone. Everyone who had given of themselves, even in small ways, without asking for anything in return. It was a reminder of the quiet, unspoken ways that people mattered to one another. On a particularly quiet morning, Clara was cleaning the counter when a young girl, no older than 8 or 9, came in with her mother. The girl was staring at the plaque, her eyes wide with curiosity. Clara watched as the little girl read the words aloud, softly, as if trying to understand them. "Who are they?" the girl asked, pointing to the plaque. Clara smiled gently and leaned down. "They're people who give more than they take," she said, her voice soft but steady. "People who make the world a little kinder, even when they don't expect anything in return." The little girl nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "I think I want to be like that," she said quietly. Clara's heart swelled. She had never thought of herself as someone who could inspire, but in that moment, she realized that she had. Sometimes, kindness didn't need to be big or loud to matter. It just needed to be consistent, to be present. It was the kind of kindness that could change lives, not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in quiet, everyday moments. The little girl and her mother left the diner, but Clara remained standing for a moment, looking at the plaque. She thought about the boy, about Adam, and about how a small act of kindness could change the course of someone's life. It wasn't always about feeding a hungry child or providing a meal. It was about offering something deeper, the gift of being seen, of knowing that someone cares. Clara didn't know if Adam would ever come back to the diner. Maybe he wouldn't. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had given him something he needed, and in doing so, had found something she needed too. As the years passed, Clara continued to work at Mello's Diner. The plaque remained on the wall, a quiet testament to the impact one person could have on another, no matter how small the action. And every morning, when the bell above the door chimed and a new day began, Clara would serve her customers, her heart full of the knowledge that kindness, true kindness, could change everything, even when it didn't seem like it would. And as for the world, maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe it was still full of hurt and confusion. But Clara had learned that if enough people took the time to show a little kindness, to offer just a small part of themselves to others, things could be different. It wasn't about being a hero or looking for recognition. It was about showing up. It was about being present in the lives of others, even when the world seemed too busy to notice. And sometimes that was enough. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story. We truly appreciate your attention and your support. The lesson from this story reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples of change in unexpected ways. It shows us that a simple gesture, given without expectation, can make a world of difference in someone's life. We hope this story has inspired you as much as it has inspired us. If you enjoyed the story, please show your support by liking the video and leaving a comment below. We would love to hear where you're from and what your thoughts are on the story. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps us continue to grow. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more stories and content. Your support allows us to keep sharing meaningful stories with the world. Once again, thank you for being a part of our community. We look forward to hearing from you and sharing more inspiring stories in the future.